What happens when love triangles, amnesia, and revenge just aren't enough? The 1970s soap operas took drama to a whole new level, with underground cities, clones, cults, and even time travel. These storylines weren't just shocking, they were unhinged, unforgettable, and totally addictive. Today we're diving into 17 soap opera plots from the 70s that went completely off the rails. Buckle up, it's going to get weird. Hit subscribe and let's begin. Erica Kane's Abortion, All My Children, 1973. In 1973, daytime TV was rocked by a storyline so controversial, it sent shockwaves through American living rooms. Erica Kane, played by the legendary Susan Lucci, became the first character on television to undergo a legal abortion following the Roe v. Wade decision. But this wasn't just any medical procedure. It was framed with emotional stakes, relationship fallout, and personal ambition. Erica didn't want a baby to ruin her modeling career. Viewers were outraged, captivated, and ultimately couldn't look away. But the real soap opera twist? Decades later, the show retconned the abortion. Turns out, the fetus wasn't aborted. It was stolen, and the child, Josh Madden, was raised by another family. That twist sparked even more backlash, with critics accusing the show of undermining reproductive rights and rewriting history for drama. What started as a groundbreaking moment in feminist television became one of the most bizarre and convoluted retcons in soap history. It's a storyline that didn't just go off the rails. It circled back, crashed again, and set fire to the tracks. And Erica Kane? She emerged from it all even more iconic. Underground City of Eterna. One Life to Live, 1979 to 1980. You thought secret affairs and love triangles were intense? Try an underground Roman-inspired city beneath suburban Llanview. In the late 1970s, One Life to Live dropped all pretense of realism when characters discovered Eterna, a secret civilization buried beneath their hometown. The city was supposedly built centuries ago and had gone unnoticed for generations. It had its own laws, royalty, and architecture straight out of a toga party fever dream. Tina Lord, Cord Roberts, and others stumbled upon this hidden world after a natural disaster opened a passage to the subterranean empire. But this wasn't just a hidden basement. There were memory-erasing chemicals, mind control chambers, and a bizarre attempt to genetically engineer perfect citizens. Characters who had previously worried about dinner parties and fashion shows were now fighting gladiator style for survival. It was completely nuts and completely unforgettable. Audiences were divided. Some loved the weird sci-fi flair, others were confused, even furious. But one thing's for sure, One Life to Live was no longer just a soap. It was a full-blown telenovela meets fantasy epic. Vicky's multiple personalities, One Life to Live, 1976. Victoria, Vicky Lord, was the picture-perfect socialite, until she wasn't. In 1976, One Life to Live dove headfirst into psychological drama with a storyline that introduced dissociative identity disorder, then called multiple personality disorder. Vicky's buried trauma from her abusive childhood unlocked an alternate personality named Nikki Smith, a brash, wild party girl who couldn't be more different from the elegant Vicky. The kicker? Nikki seduced and married a man Vicky didn't even know. When Vicky came back into control, she was horrified to discover a wedding ring on her finger and no memory of the man beside her. That was just the start. Over the years, Vicky would develop more alters: Jean, Tori, even a childlike personality named Princess, each more chaotic than the last. The storyline walked a fine line between brave and bonkers. It earned praise for acknowledging mental illness on daytime TV, but also faced criticism for sensationalizing it. Either way, audiences were glued to the screen, watching Vicky battle herself, sometimes literally, in a war of fractured identities that defined a generation of soap storytelling. Marlena's evil twin, Days of Our Lives. Before Marlena Evans was levitating and battling Satan in the 90s, she had to survive something equally ridiculous in the late 70s, an evil twin storyline. Dr. Marlena Evans, the beloved psychiatrist played by Deidre Hall, became the victim of an insidious doppelganger. Her twin Samantha wasn't just mischievous, She was a master of disguise, slipping into Marlena's life and even trying to frame her for attempted murder. The twins were nearly indistinguishable, with Samantha going as far as locking Marlena in a mental institution, then living her life on the outside. Audiences were left yelling at their TVs, torn between disbelief and fascination. It became a whiplash-inducing ride where good and evil switched places with just a haircut and some lipstick. This classic case of mistaken identity became a hallmark for Days of Our Lives, cementing it as the soap where anything could happen. Whether you bought the twist or not, you definitely remembered it. The Resurrection of Dr. Phil Brewer, General Hospital, 1970s. Death is never final in soap operas, but even by those standards, Doctor, Phil Brewer's resurrection was a head-scratcher. Originally killed off in a dramatic shooting, Phil's murder kicked off a long-running mystery. Fans wept. His wife Leslie moved on. Closure seemed complete, until out of nowhere, he came back. At first, viewers were thrilled. Had he faked his death? Was it a government cover-up? A medical miracle? Nope. Turns out it was a look-alike imposter, part of an absurd scheme that went from murder mystery to mistaken identity circus in just a few episodes. But the damage was done. Fans who had grieved were now left scratching their heads. When the real truth unraveled, the storyline went down in General Hospital history as one of its most unnecessary resurrections. Yet, it proved a point. Even the dead could be pulled from the grave, if ratings dipped low enough. Twins, separated at birth, reunited as lovers, The Young and the Restless. In the 1970s, The Young and the Restless dropped a bombshell that had viewers gasping into their coffee cups. Two strangers meet, sparks fly, and love blossoms, until they discover a horrifying truth. They're actually twins separated at birth. It played out like a twisted Greek tragedy. Neither had any idea of their shared bloodline. Flashbacks, stolen hospital records, and half-buried family secrets slowly unraveled the web of lies that led them into each other's arms. When the truth came out, the shock was real, both on-screen and off. Fans wrote angry letters, some begging for mercy, others praising the drama. The show was forced to untangle the incestuous implications by explaining that maybe they weren't full siblings after all. Maybe. But by then, the damage and the ratings boost was done. The couple's chemistry had already been seared into viewers' minds, and the twist ensured no one would forget. The Young and the Restless dared to go that far. Clone of a dead wife, another world. Even for daytime drama, this one was beyond belief. In the late 1970s, Another World gave us a love story that turned into a Frankenstein tale. A grief-stricken man, unable to move on from his dead wife, found solace in the only way a soap writer could imagine. He cloned her. Yes, a full-blown human clone. This new version of his wife looked identical, but had none of the emotional memories, mannerisms, or warmth. And yet, the man tried desperately to make her into the same woman he lost. As you might imagine, this went downhill fast. The clone rebelled, developed her own identity, and questioned the ethics of her very existence. She eventually became a tragic figure, a science experiment longing to be human. The audience reaction? Equal parts fascination and horror. Viewers couldn't believe daytime TV had gone full sci-fi, but they also couldn't look away. In a time when cloning was still largely theoretical, this storyline felt like a wild fever dream, and it absolutely was. Amnesia Love Triangle, General Hospital. In General Hospital, the 1970s were filled with head trauma and romantic confusion. One of the most exhausting and delightfully twisted plot lines involved a man losing his memory after a car accident. With no clue who he was, he fell in love with a kind nurse and started a new life. Cue the violins. But just as wedding bells were about to chime, his memory came back, and with it, his original fiancée, who thought he'd died. He now had two lives, two women in love with him, and no clue how to navigate either. What followed was a slow-burn unraveling of secrets, awkward reunions, emotional breakdowns, and a whole lot of soap opera crying. Audiences were obsessed. They argued over which woman he should choose, sending letters to the network, and even starting fan clubs. In classic soap form, it eventually resolved in a way that made no one happy, and that was kind of the point. Artificial insemination, switcheroo, All My Children. Trusting a soap opera hospital with your reproductive future? Big mistake. In a 1970s storyline that felt equal parts dystopian and sitcom, All My Children delivered a shocker involving artificial insemination gone wrong. A woman, hoping for a child, underwent insemination at a clinic, only to later discover that her sperm donor had been switched with someone else's. Someone she despised. And not just any man, the son of her rival. What began as a journey into motherhood turned into a bitter war over a child, complete with courtroom battles, threats, and bizarre medical cover-ups. The emotional toll on the characters was portrayed with intensity, but let's be honest, the whole thing was insane. It sparked conversations around ethics, identity, and whether soaps had officially lost their grip on reality. Spoiler, they had. But viewers were locked in, watching every slow reveal with morbid curiosity. Absolutely. Let's expand the final 5 entries of Part 4 of 17 bizarre 1970s soap opera storylines that went completely off the rails. Each entry will now be fully fleshed out in the same emotional, nostalgic, and curiosity-driven tone as the others. A man disguises himself as his dead sister. One life to live. In one of the most chilling and bizarre identity twists in soap opera history, One Life to Live gave viewers a storyline that blended Shakespearean tragedy with Hitchcock-level horror. A man, reeling from the sudden death of his twin sister, hatched a plan that shocked even longtime soap fans. He would assume her identity, live as her, and steal her inheritance. What began as a simple deception evolved into a full psychological transformation. He dressed in her clothes, studied her voice, and manipulated everyone she loved, all while concealing his true self beneath layers of makeup and madness. But things quickly spiraled out of control. The more time he spent being his sister, the more his own personality began to dissolve. He started to believe he was her. When the ruse finally fell apart, the unmasking scene was unforgettable, a blend of heartbreak and horror as friends and family discovered the man behind the mask. It was a bold storyline that tested the boundaries of gender, grief, and psychological trauma in a time when those topics were rarely explored on daytime TV. The performance was groundbreaking, controversial, and undeniably unforgettable. The Chimera Baby, General Hospital. Though the Chimera storyline would gain full traction decades later, its foundations were sneakily planted in the late 1970s, during a string of increasingly wild General Hospital fertility plotlines. In these early arcs, the hospital staff began to notice a disturbing trend. Babies were vanishing, identities were being manipulated, and certain newborns exhibited bizarre genetic traits that couldn't be explained. Behind closed doors, rumors spread of secret experiments, medical manipulation, and military involvement. One mother gave birth to what she believed was a healthy baby, only to be told the child had died, while another woman mysteriously received a newborn without ever going into labor. This brewing conspiracy eventually pointed to a shadowy program involving genetic engineering, where certain children were believed to carry classified DNA sequences. Some claimed these children were meant to be superior, others whispered that they were government property. The storyline fed into larger Cold War paranoia and pushed General Hospital into science fiction territory. Viewers tuned in daily for clues, terrified and fascinated. While the Chimera name wouldn't be attached until decades later, its twisted legacy began here, in whispered nursery secrets, falsified birth records, and stolen futures. The first openly gay teen, All My Children, 1977. In 1977, All My Children dared to do what no daytime soap had done before: introduce an openly gay teenager. Billy Douglas's arrival was a cultural lightning bolt. At a time when homosexuality was still heavily stigmatized on television, Billy's storyline was handled with both groundbreaking boldness and the occasional descent into melodrama. His coming out wasn't smooth. He was bullied at school, rejected by peers, and subjected to a deeply uncomfortable conversion therapy subplot. which was, shockingly, portrayed as a viable option by some characters. His own family struggled to accept him, with one relative accusing him of bringing shame to the family name. One of the most heartbreaking moments came when Billy stood on a bridge, contemplating suicide, only to be talked down by a sympathetic character who had once mocked him. Despite the chaos, Billy's story opened doors. It was messy, raw, and at times insensitive, but it got people talking. And for many viewers, especially young LGBTQ+ teens, it was the first time they saw themselves represented on screen. Though the plot veered off the rails with exaggerated crises, its heart was in the right place, and its legacy paved the way for future LGBTQ+ characters in television. Possession and time travel, Dark Shadows. If there was one soap that simply refused to play by the rules, it was Dark Shadows. In its final seasons, the show transformed from gothic melodrama to full-blown science fiction horror. In one of its wildest arcs, several main characters were pulled into a time vortex, finding themselves flung into alternate eras, from the 1700s to the distant future, often possessed by spirits from different timelines. Barnabas Collins, the iconic vampire anti-hero, had to navigate these shifting realities while fighting off possession attempts by witches, warlocks, and ghosts who sought to control his body across centuries. One episode featured a seance that not only summoned the dead, but triggered a loop in time where characters began reliving their worst traumas. Another had characters waking up in bodies that weren't their own, victims of magical transference across dimensions. These storylines were wild, confusing, and at times utterly nonsensical, but fans loved it. Dark Shadows didn't care about plausibility. It cared about mood, mystery, and the thrill of the unknown. It was like Doctor Who met Wuthering Heights, and the result was something daytime television had never seen before, and likely never will again. Brooke's affair with her daughter's boyfriend, the Belle soap prototype. While The Bold and the Beautiful premiered in 1987, its signature scandalous style was born much earlier in the 1970s thanks to its creator Bill Bell, who began experimenting with forbidden romantic plotlines while writing for The Young and the Restless. One of those infamous early prototypes? A mother who seduces her own daughter's boyfriend. Though toned down by today's standards, at the time, it was outright scandalous. The storyline followed a glamorous but lonely older woman who found herself drawn to her daughter's charismatic but emotionally needy boyfriend. After one drunken night turned into a full-blown affair, what followed was emotional devastation, a family torn apart by betrayal, jealousy, and public shame. The daughter confronted her mother in a scene that became soap legend, hair-pulling, screaming, and the kind of raw, volcanic emotion that had viewers glued to their screens. This story set the tone for future characters like Brooke Logan, who would go on to repeat this dynamic again and again in B&B. The message was clear. In soap operas, no romantic boundary is sacred, and love always comes at the highest price. Reva Maries, her ex's father, guiding light. Reva Shane was introduced toward the end of the 70s, and by the early 80s, she became soap royalty for a storyline that blurred every familial boundary. After dating a man her age, charming Joshua Lewis, Reva broke hearts and shook heads when she married his father, H.B. Lewis, a much older oil tycoon. The town of Springfield erupted in scandal. Family dinners turned into battlefields. Josh was devastated. Reva was defiant, and HB seemed oblivious to the emotional carnage. The triangle triggered bitter betrayals, a total breakdown of the father-son relationship, and later, a complete romantic implosion. It was juicy, wild, and bizarre, the kind of plot that pushed the boundaries of taste but pulled in the ratings. Viewers didn't know whether to gasp, cry, or cheer. What made it iconic was Reva's ability to sell the emotion, no matter how outrageous the situation. She wasn't just a soap vixen, she was a woman in charge, no matter how many hearts she broke. Demonic cult sacrifices, Edge of Night. Edge of Night was always a little darker than its daytime peers, but in the late 70s, it veered hard into gothic horror territory. One of its most bizarre arcs involved a secret cult, operating beneath the surface of Monticello, complete with sinister ceremonies, creepy symbols, and yes, alleged human sacrifices. Characters were hypnotized, kidnapped, and brainwashed. Rituals were hinted at, never shown outright, leaving audiences' imaginations to do the terrifying work. A beloved character nearly became a victim in a blood sacrifice, only to be saved at the last second. The storyline blurred the line between soap opera and horror film. Viewers were divided. Some adored the horror thriller direction, while others found it too outlandish for a soap. But it proved that no genre was off limits. Even satanic cults had a place in daytime drama. Cross-time communication. Through a mirror. Dark shadows. Only dark shadows could make a haunted mirror into a plot device worthy of Shakespeare and LSD at the same time. One of the most surreal moments of the series occurred when a character began communicating with her past and future selves through a mirror. These weren't just dream sequences. She'd see herself as a Victorian woman trapped in danger, or a future version whispering dire warnings about impending doom. It created a plot loop where past decisions altered future episodes, and future warnings reshaped present ones. Soap fans weren't just keeping up with cheating spouses, they were tracking interdimensional continuity. It was utterly confusing, wildly experimental, and 100% unforgettable. It stretched the soap format into science fiction and solidified Dark Shadows as the king of strange. From demonic possessions to lovers who turned out to be siblings, the 1970s proved there were no limits in daytime television. These outrageous plots kept viewers hooked, horrified, and hungry for more. If you love the madness, don't forget to like, comment your favorite, and subscribe for more wild stories from TV's strangest decade.